Sup guys? This is a fleet building video for the Light Cruiser Arbiter hard mode, aka Temperance. Similar to the chapter 14 fleet building video, the goal of this video is to build 4 fleets in order to beat the Arbiter, and explain my thought process through the whole way, so that you can take the same ideas and use it to build your own fleets based on the resources that you have. I will turn off fleet tech and remove all mail officers, but they really do help significantly, so don't neglect them if you want to make your life easier. I will be using submarines though. If you don't have submarines, feel free to cry in the comments because everyone cares. And I will also avoid using UR ships. If you have them, then by all means use them. It will make things much easier. But even if you're missing some UR ships or have not fully raised them, you will still be able to defeat the boss following these principles. What you can't skimp out on though is levels and also equipment. Feel free to cry about how you want to beat the Arbiter but can't be bothered to farm Operation Siren for gear lot materials. Everyone cares. So, to start off, let's first talk about the boss mechanics. It's a light cruiser, so as expected, it has light armor. But it spawns a minion at 1 minute remaining, which actually has medium armor. This means that aside from HE guns, certain SAP guns and AP Vanguard guns with Pierce will work just fine against it. This month, it has 2 particularly annoying skills. The first skill spawns a shield that nullifies 50% of shelling damage when its HP dips below 30%. To combat this, if you're using battleships, you should use them at the start and finish it off with carriers and torpedoes. The second skill creates a shield every 20 seconds. This one is even more annoying than the first one because it completely blocks typical main fleet damage intervals. In order to get around this, you want about 17 to 18 second cooldowns on your battleships and airstrikes, which is significantly easier to accomplish with fleet tech reload as well as Maleficer reload, but we're going to work around it for the people who don't have them. One thing that makes it a little more bearable is that it starts counting from 1 minute 27 seconds in and not 1 minute and 30 seconds. So you notice that it takes damage at 1 minute 10 seconds up until when the shield kicks in at 1 minute and 7 seconds. And then it takes 0 damage until 1 minute and 1 second when it starts taking damage again. So it's a bit easier than if the window was exactly on the 20-second mark. Alright, now let's get into the fleets. First, a quick overview of all of them. The first fleet is an anti-light battleship fleet, using Hood and Howe's reload buffs to beat the shield timing. In the Vanguard, Talon is acting as the tank, Voroshilov as the battleship buffer, whose timing matches up extremely well with the guns I'll be using on the battleships. And then I needed an HMS ship to trigger Howe's 3 HMS buff, so I just used an easily accessible and decent option in Shropshire. Next is the classic Nakaga, as the Foxes are naturally able to beat the shield timing. Kashino is used as the tank because, even when she sinks, the aviation buff from her cargo remains. Using Chikuma as the tank was a bit unreliable, but she can easily survive if she starts tanking only after Kashino sinks. All 3 Vanguards increase carrier damage in some way. Also, I completely forgot Stephen Potter had to be in the middle for her Vanguard buff because I don't use her often, but it worked out in the end. So just keep that in mind if you're going to use her. After that, we have a light carrier fleet, which I will use to finish off the boss. These light carriers have a higher reload stat than typical carriers, while dealing just about as much damage, and Independence further increases their reload so they're able to beat the shield timings without much issue. Haguro is tanking, Sirius buffing the carriers, and then I chose Northampton because I'm using Independence, who is a USS light carrier, as my flagship. Even if you're not sinking, Independence's reload is so high that the boss is pretty much slowed for half the battle from Northampton's slow, making for a pretty fun combo. And the final fleet, which I will send out third actually, is a KMS carrier fleet. Similar to the Nakaga fleet, Bismarck and Peter Strasser's reload buffs allow them to beat the shield. As you can probably tell by now, Huygen is used as the tank, while Aurora is used for her debuff, which works extremely well against the boss. But she does have some issues staying alive at level 120, even when sandwiched in the middle. And in the rear, I'm using Scylla, who does good damage against light armor and has a minor buff for carriers. Now, I will explain the equipment choices of each fleet and then show them in action. In general, I avoided rainbow equipment, and especially plus 13 rainbow equipment, because it takes way too many plates. but I used some plus 13 gold equipment, which I believe should be a top priority to invest in. I used a total of 2 sets of plus 13 auxiliaries at most on battleships, and same for carriers. You can change equipment between each fight, and if you're lacking in equipment, you should definitely take advantage of that. I am using HE main guns on the battleships since it's a light armor enemy. For all 3 battleships, the combination of high performance fire control radar, hood, and house buffs allowed them to just beat the shield timings. If you were to use faster twin guns instead, sure, but it'll be easier to desync from the shield, but they're so fast that they'll end up catching onto a shield eventually. The boss has pretty high evasion, so it's definitely a good idea to stack up on some accuracy equipment, especially if you don't have a lot of accuracy fleet tech. If you have an MK7, it will obviously be an upgrade over MK6. I upgraded both of mine to plus 13, so they were out of the picture. If you have an MK7 even at plus 10, that should be enough to make up for the lack of plus 13 auxiliaries. In the Vanguard, the equipment is not super important, but you definitely want to maximize for survivability, especially if they're not level 125, as the Arbiter hits quite hard. Pretty much all of the equipments are cookie cutter good options for those slots. I used an AP gun on Talon despite the enemy being light armor, because as I mentioned earlier, the summon is medium armor and the pierce from the AP gun can hit both enemies at the same time. HE, like the gun on Shropshire, will still work perfectly fine. Here's the first fight.
Sate, ロイヤルレディの流儀をお見せしましょう。打ち続けなさい。差し勝ち、突き抜ける。全手法、打ち続けなさい。沈めて、解けなさい。引っ張るな。あう、うがいはないわ。化け物か、解けなさい。週勝ち、突き抜ける。優雅は伊達じゃありませんよ。全手法、打ち続けなさい。迷わないでなさい。頑張らないと。全手法、解けなさい。打ち続けなさい。差し勝ち、全手法、突き抜ける。打ち続けなさい。迷わないわ。優雅は伊達じゃありませんよ。ここは通さないよ。化け物か、解けなさい。化け物か、解けなさい。化け物か、迷わないわ。差し勝ち、突き抜ける。あと少しだけ耐えて。優雅は伊達じゃありませんよ。次は負けないわ。
Okay, so I let U-96 die in this run, which was a huge mistake that could have cost me the kill in the end. After this run, I made sure to summon my submarines at 24 seconds remaining into each fight, so that they would not surface before the battle ended and die. The fleet did about 22 bars, which is a bit on the low side, but some of the other fleets will be able to pick up the slack. Now, let's take a look at the equipment for the Nakaga fleet. I'm using the same thing for both boxes. I went with the AP rocket planes because the HVAR is an event limited item that had to be farmed from the event stage, so I'm not expecting everyone to have it, but if you have it, then it is probably better. BF-109s are definitely one of the best planes in terms of cost performance for plus 13, and upgrading 2 of them is not a bad idea. For the dive bombers, you can't go wrong with using SB2C. Of course, Tenrai and Skyraider are much better, but if you don't have them, SB2C gets the job done. Whatever you do, just don't use the gold BTD dive bomber. For the torpedo bombers, the JU-87 are popular for their unique drop pattern, which can potentially increase hit rate, and also one of the best options to spend your plane plates on. As for the auxiliaries, you can by all means use 2 catapults for Foxes, but I just used beacons because I will be using them for the other carrier fleets anyway. Nagato's equipment is pretty much the exact same as the other battleships, so I won't bother going over them again. In the Vanguard, I'm once again maximizing for survivability. I did not use Pearl Tier in the previous fleet, but it's a good idea to move it around to every single fleet while tackling the Arbiter. The damage equipment of the Vanguard is by no means min-maxed, as it probably won't move the needle too much, so I just used whatever was lying around. And here is the fleet in action. Submarines will be summoned with 24 seconds remaining so they can do damage while the enemy doesn't have its shield up, and also so that the battle will end before they surface and die.
この程度の傷、指揮官様に見捨てられることと比べると何でもありませんわ。
And that fleet was only able to deal 18 bars of damage, even less than the first fleet. Its biggest weakness was the lack of slows to set up the airstrikes. So if you actually are going to use the Foxes for whatever reason, then try to help them with some slow support, but there are definitely many better options. Next, let's look at the Ironblood carrier fleet. Bismarck's equipment is the same as all the other battleships'. The carriers are using the same equipment as the Foxes, except this time the beacons are necessary, and I had to replace the SB2Cs with Suisei Kais in order to beat the shield timings. Other than that, you can see the same theme with the Vanguard, maximizing for survivability, Rudder and Beaver on a heavy cruiser tank, and Pearl Tiers on somebody. Let's see how this fleet does.
何隻でも相手してやるわ。私から逃れられない。逃げないでくださいね。逃げないでくださいね。時は満ちた。私からこの程度じゃ足りないわ。もっとだ。面白いわね。時は私から逃れられないでくださいね。我の射程内にのみ真理この程度じゃ足りないわ。もっとだ。逃げないでくださいね。時は私から逃れられない。逃げないでくださいね。我の射程内にのみ真理この程度じゃ足りないわ。もっと。 もっとだ。沈めてって引っ張るな。2だ。時は満ちた。私から逃れられない。絶対におそばに戻ります。
我の射程内にのみ真理あり。
立場をわきまえず申し訳ございません。
Okay, a very impressive 35 bars. At this point, I'm fairly confident that the last fleet will have no issue cleaning up the rest. Let's take a look at the equipment I used. Starting from the top left, Albion is using a fully stacked loadout because she's going to be carrying the brunt of the damage. Sayun had to be used over Ju-87 in order to beat the shield timings. I didn't bother changing Independence's equipment from her usual mobbing equipment because I felt that the anti-air she provides with the Pancake and Wyvern will be able to keep my carriers concealed the entire time, increasing their damage output significantly. For Centaur, I used +10 planes and made sure that she would launch before Albion for Albion to receive the buff. The VF-17 fighter is not the best option for her, but I knew it was most likely going to be strong enough to just finish off the boss. In the Vanguard, we have the same story as all the other fleets, moving around a Beaver Badge, Pearl Tier, and Manchu as needed. And now, let's see the final battle.
集中せよ。警戒を緩めるな。
先輩たちの勇姿再現してみせます。ハグロの動きは見切れないっすよ。
そこ。狙い定めた。
幸運じゃなかったって。先輩たち再現ください。
I summoned my submarines at 1 minute and 7 seconds remaining in order to maximize damage against the summon, as it doesn't matter if they sink after this fight.
ハグロの動きは見切れないっすよ。
そこ。狙い定めた。そこ。
先輩たち再現くださいね。
そこ。
ハグロの動きは見切れないっすよ。
そこ。狙い定めた。
先輩たち見てくださいね。ここは通さないよ。じゃなくて、ご主人様のメイドはやらせはしません。ご主人様のメイドはやらせはしません。
見えた。狙い定めた。
先輩たち見てくださいね。先輩方に恥をかかせないようにするにはやはり日頃の努力が大事ですね。白亜のアルビオン、指揮官と先輩方に勝利を。
So as you can see, even without an AA carry like Cheshire or San Diego, the carriers managed to stay concealed the entire time because Independence is really packing AA like that. So, as you can see, with the appropriate levels and some proper equipment use, you can definitely take down this boss without being anal in min-maxing everything. That about wraps it up for this video. If you have any complaints that I did not address, feel free to cry about it in the comments. God loves a crier. Hope you guys found it useful. Thanks for watching, and good luck with the Arbiter.